a little bit different, but it's fine. Hi, I'm Fiona. Nice to be here. Good morning. I'm going to try and do this without paper, but I just did it last night, if I'm honest. So I think about halfway through, I will need to refer to my notes. So is it just the little arrow there? Yeah, okay. So my name's Fiona. I'm the Director of Arts at Carcler. I have worked for Carcler for 10 years. It's gone very fast because it's been a fascinating place to work, and I'm incredibly lucky to do such an interesting role, meet so many interesting people through my work. And I thought really today, the reason why it's a bit different than what I normally do is I just thought I would share some of that with you, as I know you're all creative people who are going to be interested in some of the samples of the work that we receive. So I'm going to steer away from giving you the big overview of what our organisation does, but you can ask me loads later or email me, etc. So, sorry, pointing the wrong way. Thank you. So, in a nutshell, Carcler Arts is a charity that's been going for over 50 years. And do tell me if I don't speak loud enough. I'm trying to speak nice and loud to the back. Can you hear me? Good. We're a charity that's been going for over 50 years. We are one of the better known arts in criminal justice charities. An easy way for me to describe what we do is that we don't so much go into prisons and do workshops and teach art or music. There's people who generally do that. We are more of a motivator, an organisation that will give you feedback on your work. We arrange mentors to help people. So we encourage a lot of people in prisons and other criminal justice settings to participate in the arts. And this is a kind of, whoa, sorry. This is just a nutshell of what we do. I will also show you a lot of visual arts today. It's kind of because whenever I put music into slides presentations, it always goes wrong. So we do have a lot of music entries, a lot of writing entries, but loads of visual arts entries. In fact, we get over 7,000 entries to our annual awards every year. And from the annual awards, we spin off everything else that we do. So our mentoring, our feedback, our sales, award certificates, prizes, sales. We have people who've been through prison who we train and employ to give tours of our exhibitions. We publish little books of poetry, and I'll tell you what's coming up next or what's on now at the end. Thank you. This is the kind of, again, without me going into every layer of what we do, this is a poster that went to all of the people that we could reach who are in prisons or in other criminal justice settings who we were trying to encourage to take part in our awards last year. Actually, this poster was designed by someone who had previously entered our awards, and she made this great 2-page poster telling people about our process. It is a little bit complicated, and it's like an annual process, so we wanted someone to make it clear to people. And then on the back, this says enter an arts competition, but in lots of different languages. And for this, I mean, we're a tiny charity. I kind of want to stress we use big venues, or we team up with brilliant designers to amplify what we do, but there's only 12 of us working in Carcler, and we're based in a really, really ramshackle building just outside Wormwood Scrubs prison. So in fact, that's a drawing. Picture 4 is a drawing of our building, and it's pretty accurate, really. So for all these different languages, I hope that they say what I'm saying that they say, but I believe they do because no one's complained yet. So for example, we did a call out to all our supporters who knows how to say this in different languages so that we could get this. We're not a big company who can pay for translators. Thank you. Okay, so I just took your tagline, everyone is creative, because obviously that is just at the heart of what we do. It's completely what I believe, and it's what Carcler believes. We have so many reasons for what we do, and so many benefits. Some of them we have proven, some of them we've got researchers to look at statistics and the benefits of the arts, getting people back into education, improving confidence, communication, whether that's with prison staff or with other people within the prison, other prisoners. The arts can reignite contact back with families for prisoners, which is actually the most important thing to stop reoffending when people are released. The arts can teach people skills, teach people, if they sell their work, the value of selling their work and the value of making something that someone cherishes. It can teach people new skills, get them qualifications, get them into foundation courses at college, get them GCSEs. But those are all the things that we always say, and they're all true, and some of them are easy to prove with statistics. Some of them are much harder to prove. They're just what people say to us and what we know and what we know in our guts. But I guess the core is that everyone can be creative. So of course, everyone in criminal justice system can be creative too. I don't think necessarily that people in the criminal justice system are more creative than other people, but I do think that the criminal justice system and arts in that kind of difficult setting, challenging setting, they can actually be really focused. And I think what I thought I would focus on a bit more today and hopefully share with you is some of the inspiration that if you're a creative person, maybe that focus on work made in really challenging conditions can kind of help you learn something about creativity in yourself. It's kind of what I feel like I've learned in 10 years. So, our entrance, everyone's creative, everyone in prison's creative. Everyone in prison is making art or writing or music about obviously the same things that we all do. So some people are writing music about falling in love, falling out of love. People are writing poems about grief. People are doing studies of fruit and food, just as they would other places. This is actually on a prison plate. This is a very strange artwork. This is someone's taken a prison plate from the canteen of the prison, and then they have painted onto it. So the plate is actually the canvas. It's pretty cool. Next one, thank you. People are making handmade books with their personal thoughts inside them, exploring a narrative or trying to tell us something and putting it into a book. And the next one. And people are making boxes, making trinkets. Often this kind of work is for gifts for other people. I've seen, this is quite elaborate, made of wood. It's quite large. But I've also seen works that are like really small matchstick boxes, decorated, and they've been clearly made to put something in for a mother, father, someone on the outside. But also, like all artists, like all creatives, our prisoners are obviously definitely experimenting. So this is a brilliant piece. This is going to be in our next show. It's just brilliant. It's crocheted, I think, crocheted flowers on top of the almond milk box. And I feel like it takes a certain level of confidence to just experiment and submit that for the awards. And our curator chose it for the show because it's lively. I love it. I do love it. I love it. And the next one. Also experimentation. This is a hat that you can wear, made of newspapers. We get loads of work made out of folded bits of paper. And some of it is tiny, and some of it is really grand like this. And the next one, also experimentation. This is called Stained Glass Superman. This is, I think that this is ballpoint pens that have been cracked up, and then he's made the Superman from it. So sometimes we don't 100% know what the materials were. We have to really kind of look at them. So yeah, people are making work for so many reasons. I think, yeah, keep this one. This is the bit where I have to remind myself. Okay, so, but maybe what's a bit different or very focused in the criminal justice system and in the arts is that many of our artists are at a really significant moment in their lives. Many of them are at crisis point or actually on a turning point in a positive part of their lives. But certainly it's a really significant moment in your life if you're in prison and you've started to feel that little bit of confidence grow and you feel like you can make artwork and crucially, you want to share it with other people, which is what you're doing by entering our awards. So I feel like many of our entrants are feeling comfortable in a classroom environment for the first time. They're reconnecting with their family. Many of them might be dealing with isolation or depression. Many are struggling with mental health, or they might be thinking about feelings of guilt or anger. They might feel a sense of injustice. Obviously, they might also just be incredibly bored. There's not, in the criminal justice system, there are education departments in prisons, but many people will tell you that prisoners are actually locked up in their cell alone or with one other person for a huge portion of the day. So there's a lot of boredom as well. So this, I think, is a piece. I've met this artist. I don't normally know the artist, but I have met this artist, and this piece is about him and his wife and remembering his wedding day. The next one. We get lots and lots of work that is clearly in that moment of you're in prison, you're away from everyone. So many portraits of dogs, because obviously that's home, and that's what you've left behind. So we get lots and lots of, actually quite, because I know the context, moving paintings of dogs. And the next one, thanks. And people who obviously miss family and friends. Yeah, so obviously, and I think some of the works like this is kind of portraiture done as a gift for someone else, but I've also heard of, so I'll see this work and I'll think, my goodness, that's of his 2 children. It might not be. It might be that he's been asked to do a portrait for another prisoner from a photograph, and then because there's, as the rest of us, there is quite high value on having a drawing of a portrait as a keepsake. So yeah, lots of people thinking back of home. So I think that our entrance contribution is especially inspiring if you're a creative person. That's fine. So for example, our entrants are dealing with really limited situation. They're making work despite so many other things. So it kind of, as a creative person, then makes you sometimes a little bit humbled. Maybe that can sometimes be a bit debilitating, actually, but sometimes you think, right, okay, well, you've got no materials. This person carved work out of soap, and they're amazing. The next one, you could have maybe no space to make your work. Well, this person in a prison cell got matchsticks, somehow merged them together, and then sculpted them. And the next one, or you might have had no formal training, you might not be able to afford to go to the course that you want to go to, but this person is 18 and they're in a young offenders institution, and yet they made this really experimental painting that I just think is so accomplished, but I know that they haven't had a formal education at all, and they certainly haven't gone to art school, and they're quite young. So yes, it can be extremely humbling, and that's how I feel every day, really, at Carlisle. I went to art school. After loving art at high school, I was, encouraged and really privileged to be in a position that I went off to art school, met lots of other artistic people, spent 4 years making art, loving it, and then now I get to work in the arts. And I think that what is humbling for me about Carlisle is that when I go into prisons, which is maybe like once every 2 months or so, and I meet entrants who've entered the awards, it can kind of either stop me in my tracks and make me think, oh gosh, or it can inspire me. So I choose it to inspire me, that the entrants will say to me that literally art has saved their lives. And I think, my goodness, I had all that privilege, and art was brilliant, and art is brilliant for me, and it's a great part of my life. But I do meet people every day whose lives have been changed. Probably the next one. I don't want to read all the quotes to you, but we get just thousands of quotes from entrants about the hope that being creative has given them, the connection with their family, or that we've given them feedback on their work, and just getting feedback from a viewer, that inspiration and the validation that can give someone. So it does make me kind of think, and what I thought I would share with you is this kind of value that creativity can have in the justice system, but I think that it is a bit humbling, and it does kind of sometimes make me think, oh gosh, but I'm not as dedicated as the people that I work with. I don't make art despite lots of challenges. It's quite easy for me if I want to. But I do think that you can kind of store away and you can learn what a value the arts and creativity can have until probably at some point in all of our lives we will need that ourselves. And I think that kind of gives me quite a lot of comfort. I think I now know from our entrance, that's what it's taught me being working on the arts programmes at Cursor. And the next one. Yeah, this is a beautiful embroidery that someone's made that kind of says what's in those quotes, but in an artwork. Gorgeous piece. Yeah, so the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so I just kind of end before I bring it all to a close. I guess I just wanted to pause there and kind of hope that I kind of summed up that it's very much sorry, I totally lost my train of thought. Just thinking. It's that beautiful piece before, that green one. Yeah, in the criminal justice system, I think that the arts and creativity are just as important as they can be in the outside world, but that maybe what people see when they come to our exhibitions and they read our books is that they can really see that focused and emphasised, and that's kind of what I wanted to share with you. And I'm going to skip the next two slides because I know we're going to cover it in the next bit. And what I would do is urge you to come along and see some of our exhibitions. We try to curate them differently every time. So the next show that we're actually working on right now is at South Bank Centre, and it's curated by the jazz musician Soweto Kinch. So he selected all the work for the show, and it's a completely different approach. So last year's show was curated by people who had a loved one in prison. And if you come along to the shows, then you will see a little bit more, and I guess get what you want from it, and rather than my interpretation. You'll see lots of amazing artwork. And we're also, in the next few weeks, announcing that we're taking part in the London Jazz Festival this year. So please come and see some of our shows. And when we do the How We Would Change the World, I'll go back and do my red slides. Okay, thank you.
I'm also going to leave some notes here, just in case, mainly because being brief is not my forte, and I'm scared I might start rambling, so I can use those to get me back on track if I need to. So today, I guess I'm going to talk to you in two parts, a bit about kind of some of my takes on justice, and then also about the appropriate adult role. Has anyone here heard of an appropriate adult? Yeah, a couple, one. Did you hear about it from me? You can put your hand down. There's like 3 hands, and so partly why I like to talk about the role is that it really surprises me that most people don't know about it, and occasionally someone will ask me if Fred West had an appropriate adult, which he did, which isn't like the greatest selling point. Google that if you wish, but it wasn't a great moment for appropriate adults. But really the role is relatively unknown about, so I want to talk to you about that. I think in the UK, we're not that good at talking about our own justice system, and we're far better at kind of pointing the finger at the US and critiquing their system than we are about thinking about our own, and things such as the fact that we have the lowest age of criminal responsibility in Europe here in the UK at 10 years old, and we're not often really talking about things like that. And I think we spend most of our time, many of us as outsiders to the justice system, kind of hoping that we'll never be a victim, feeling pretty certain that we'll never become a perpetrator, and even if we somehow become both along the way, we just kind of want to stay away from the system as much as possible. And it can feel really impossible to make any kind of changes to that system, especially if we're aware of how unjust it can be. And then sometimes we might think about how should we make changes and start to think about activism, but that feels really kind of overwhelming and fraught with failure. And I've been called an activist a couple of times recently and feel immediately conscious of how resistant I feel to that and unable to kind of take on that title. So I'm not trying to convince anyone here to be a justice activist today. but I do think that we can all be more active, and I do feel confident and able to say that I am active. So I hope that kind of talking to you about the appropriate adult role will either kind of encourage you to want to do that role, or to think of someone else that would be really good at it and be able to take on that kind of position, especially men. So I really want to see more men in the role. Lots of the people that I show up for as an appropriate adult are men, but most of our volunteers by far are women. So try and hold that in mind when we're speaking today, I guess. Before I talk about the role too much, I think I'll talk a little bit about why I started volunteering as an appropriate adult, which was about I think just over a year ago. So yeah, I guess I'll talk a bit about that. So I've spent most of my working life working with vulnerable children or adults in a number of roles. So I've worked as an assistant psychologist in a high security prison in South London. I've worked as an outreach worker with young people in youth offending teams, and looked after children teams and pupil referral units, which are those schools that are scattered around for children that have been removed from school. And I mention all those roles because even if they're not directly in the justice system, they include a lot of people that are more likely to end up there. And when people know that I've done that kind of work, especially working in prison, so the crimes range from kind of shoplifting, kind of in the community that I've worked with, right up to kind of murder and double murder, and often the questions that come with that kind of work is kind of like, how can you work with these bad people that have done these like really bad things? And generally my answer is that if you've spent any time working within the justice system, you kind of stop viewing crime and criminality as such a like moral issue, and start to learn that it's far more about circumstances. When you go into places that are when you go into the criminal justice system, it's rarely made up of this kind of cross-section of society with some people that just chose to, you know, be bad. And in fact, we see things like the fact that looked after children, so children in care, are really overrepresented in the justice system, which I think points to problems with our criminal justice system and our care system in the UK. And I'm not going to get into too much personal details, but I was removed from my mother's care when I was 11 and had a relatively positive experience of that care system. So I was temporarily fostered by a family friend, and then I was raised by my incredible auntie, who did like an amazing job. And so, yeah, so I have some experience, and I have, you know, various of the characteristics. I'm also obviously have black heritage that might mean that I'd be more likely to end up there. And people do kind of really congratulate me and say, like, you know, like, how did you turn out so well? Like, this is really cool, like, well done, this is like really brilliant, like, I'm about to go to university for the 4th time, it's great. And like, I could stand here and be like, that's because I'm resilient, or like, I'm smart, and blah, 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 and these things that might be true. But really, it's actually because of the people that chose to be active in my life. It's my grandma, it's my auntie, it's the teachers that took more time out than they needed to. It was mentors, it was staff and volunteers at the Young Carers Project when I was living at home, and it was all these people that fed into me, and I stand here today because of all those people. So I guess that's essentially why I do things like the appropriate adult role, because I believe in the power of individual support to people. And I can remember individuals that took time out with me, that let me come into school early, let me stay at school late, and all those things. So that's a bit about why I do the role. I was going to see if anyone could tell me what the appropriate adult role was, but I guess we know that people don't know much about it. So this is where I have to try and remember a bit better. But the appropriate adult role came about following the 1972 Maxwell Confe murder case. So that was a case where an 18-year-old with severe learning difficulties made a false confession to the murder. And after that, and he was interviewed without an adult there, even though it was already kind of at the time agreed that people with kind of severe learning difficulties or any other vulnerabilities as adults or children should have someone there. That didn't happen for the 3 people that were interviewed in the case, and so there was a false confession. And after that, there was the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act that came about with the codes of practice that basically is the rule book for police and custody that we have today, and in that included appropriate adults. And so the National Appropriate Adult Network, which is kind of the main organisation for appropriate adults in the UK, defined the role as being to, can I think about this now, to safeguard the interest, rights, entitlements and welfare of children and vulnerable adults when they're accused of a criminal offence by ensuring that they are treated in a just and fair manner, and that they're able to participate effectively in the process. So there's kind of three main things there. One, we work with children and vulnerable adults. And two, we're there to make sure that they're treated in a just and fair way, respectfully, by the police and all that processes. And also that they're able to participate effectively. So can they communicate? Are people understanding each other in this process? So that's the main kind of overarching description of the role. And I think, in a way, it's easiest to tell you about the role through a lens of a case that comes to mind and is a fairly kind of typical case and can kind of walk you through what happens when I show up to the police station. So I don't just kind of show up randomly. I put my name down for 2 or 3 shifts a month, sometimes ad hoc. I actually just had a text from the woman that does appropriate adulting asking me if I could go to the police station this morning, which is a bit more ad hoc. But normally I would choose 2 dates in advance and I'll be on call in those times. And so if a vulnerable person or a vulnerable child is arrested during that time, then the police will call the local authority, who will call me, and then I get 70 minutes to get to the police station, and then I'll show up. And my roles when I'm there really is essentially to make sure that they understand what they're being told and that they understand the importance of what they're being told. So the reason that these groups of people are selected as needing appropriate adults is that they're more likely to make false confessions with the aim of getting out of the police station. So they go for the short-term gain over the long-term gain. And if you've done work with young people, you're probably fairly familiar with that trait. And it's not because they're idiots, it's just like being young. And we're not going to get into the frontal lobes, but their ability to think about consequences is just not as developed. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why vulnerable adults might not be able to think as clearly. So if I think about a typical case of thinking about a boy that I supported, a 14-year-old boy who was arrested for possession of a small amount of cannabis. And on arrival, I was told that he was in a really bad mood and he wasn't going to speak to me. And I thought it was probably fair enough that he was in a bad mood and that he probably was going to speak to me and it was going to be all right. And so he comes out and kind of he's introduced to me. So when a person's arrested, they are taken to the police station and they're booked into custody and they'll have their rights read to them before an appropriate adult's there. And then when they arrive, they'll meet me and they'll have their rights read to them again. And then I will have a private consultation with them where I think about kind of how can I best support them, what are their needs, have they had anything to eat, have they had anything to drink, et cetera, et cetera. Have they got any complaints, anything that's not been okay? So I meet this boy and he comes out and he is indeed head low, avoiding eye contact, reluctantly shakes my hand, and he's doing kind of what I would call his best big man act, which is to say actually that he's trying to feel safe, he's trying to protect himself, and he's just putting on a brave face, which is fine by me, but it's probably quite devastating for him that when I see him I just think he looks really cute and scared, and it's not what he's going for at all, but that's just how I feel having worked with lots of young people. It's you see this, I see a little boy, and I'm also immediately conscious that he's so at risk of being treated like a man. And one of my main aims, especially when I'm working with boys, and I don't even call them young men, I call them boys, is to treat them as that, they are children. And so, he shakes my hand and we go into this room and we sit down and then I say, how are you? How's it going? How are you feeling? He's yeah, it's calm. I'm okay, cool, fine. And I often start with this question. So I say to him, are you feeling scared? And he laughs at me, no. And I kind of say, well, I might be feeling scared when I was 14 if I was in this situation. And he kind of looks at me and he asks me if I work for the police. And I tell him again, I've already told him that I don't work for the police. And I explain my role and I explain that, no, I don't work for the police. And actually I'm a volunteer and I'm there for young people like him because I want to support him. And he kind of gradually starts softening. And we talk a bit about school and he says that, he thinks he's messed up school now. And I ask him if it's his first time being arrested and he says that it is. And I ask him if he's had anything to eat and he says no. And I check that he's been offered and he has been offered, which is what we'd hope for. But he says, the food's dirt and I'm not eating this food. And then I try to talk to him about, and talk to all the young people especially about this, about the fact that when they're in the police station, I don't want it to happen to them. I want them to have some agency. I want them to be aware and conscious and kind of present there. Because, not only because they deserve to be, and it's their best way of kind of getting the best out of the situation, not being passive, but also that they might end up there again. And also that lots of the young people that I do end up working with know other young people that have been arrested or will be arrested, and I want them to be able to talk about what happens in a realistic way, and I want them to be able to say, by the way, if your mum can't show up to be your appropriate adult, some random woman might, she's all right, like, talk to her, but, you know, and use these things, because one of the main things that I spend a lot of my time doing, once the person's had their 3 main rights read to them, which is the right to free and independent legal advice, the right to let someone know that they're there, and the right to read the codes of practice, so the right to read the rule book. And often young people will be like, nah, I don't want a solicitor. Like, I don't want legal advice. And our scheme actually overrides that full stop, so we just request a solicitor, and they can ignore them when they come. But I spend a lot of my time trying to convince the young person to take the legal advice. And one of the ways that they'll do that is if they can actually build rapport with you and trust you and have a conversation with you enough to believe that it's worth doing. So I kind of say to him, okay, maybe like, what about, could we have something to eat or drink? He's, you know, adamant, no. And I tell him, like, I've heard that the porridge is your best bet. And then in this moment, he tells me that he only eats his mum's porridge. And then this is, I think, the moment when he'd like kind of crumbled back into the 14-year-old boy. And it's a really nice moment where you can see all the softening. Once they've admitted that they only eat their mum's porridge, you've kind of gotten in that you're now a child and an adult. We agree in the end on like a sugary cup of tea. I'll have one too, and have a glass of water, which is is a good start. I asked him if he's called his mum, and he said that the police have, but he's not spoken to her, and that he's fine with that. He doesn't need to. We talk a bit about the fact that I've ordered him a solicitor, and they're going to come, and when they get here, he doesn't have to speak to them if he doesn't want to. But in the meantime, we're going to go through some of the procedures, we're going to have his photos taken and his prints taken. I'm going to be there for any of that. And I explain, you know, that we're going to talk a bit more. I explain the interview process to him, and I explain the caution to him. Does anyone know the UK caution that's said in the police station? So you'll have heard it on TV. So you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely on in court. Anything that you do say may be given in evidence, which is actually very complicated, and you have to weigh up a lot in that. It's like you could say something, you don't have to say something. If you do say it, then it could go wrong, but if you don't say, it's actually quite a lot to weigh up there. And that can often be the moment when you're explaining that to a young person, explaining that's the kind of core of their rights. And then you explain that I'm not legal advice, where they do start to realise that maybe it would be good to have some legal advice right now. And so he agrees that, okay, fine, like, let the solicitor come. He can come. Even though at this point he's still convinced that it's going to make him look more guilty, and that it's just long. And I'm like, well, you can talk it through with them, like, you don't have to take their advice. It's fine. So he agrees to do that. We have our tea. We go and have the photos taken. And kind of as we're leaving our little consultation room, he says, like, actually, you know, like, I will call my mum. And it's nice, and we've already gone from a point in that short moment from arriving, and they have the right to deny legal support. So we've gone from having this boy that's acting like a man and being treated like a man, who isn't going to have a solicitor, who isn't going to talk to his mum, to someone that's leaving as a child and is going to have a solicitor and is going to talk to his mum. And it's these moments when I'm happy about the role and I can see that it is worthwhile. So he does speak to his mum, and his solicitor comes, and, you know, he takes the advice from the solicitor, and we go into interview together. I think in that case, actually, I wasn't there for the outcome, and so I left, and he would have had another appropriate adult come in the afternoon to be there for whether he was kind of charged or bailed or whatever. But I get one of the other key moments that I was really glad to see him bolster in actual confidence was there was a gap between our consultation and the interview, when he needed to go back to his cell, and he was like, I'm going to ask the police for something to read. And I was like, yes, you are. This is exactly what I'm here for. Like, I'm here for this. And then I was like, I've got one step better here. I was like, I'm going to ask them if I can give you something to read. And he's like, yeah, okay, cool, what have you got? And I'd just been to a Afro-punk event about black masculinity. So I was like, thinking like, I'm giving him this. So I asked the police, and I was like, oh, like, is it all right if I just give him this little magazine I've got? And they're like, yeah, it's fine, there's Staples. And so I like give him this little booklet, and he goes back to his cell for a while, before we go into the interview. And then when we came out of the interview and I'm explaining that like I have to leave now, but someone else will come back to charge, that you can still talk to them, trust them, it's fine, drop the big man act. He's like, yeah, it's good, I get it now. And before I leave, he asks me if I'll sign this little magazine I've given him. And I literally, even when I think about it now, it like brings a tear to my like. And not because it's like I'm great, it's the fact that it's such a testament to how much he appreciated being able to be a child and being treated like a child, because he is that. And I think that it's a really good example of why this role is worth showing up and thinking about who people are and who they're perceived as and who they act like, and the importance of that. And yeah, so in that moment I felt that it was a real kind of testament to the role. I feel like there's loads that I've missed out from what I've planned, but it's a fairly good summary. I suppose other things to include, and maybe I think that's often I'll answer more in the Q&A when I talk about this, but is that we're also present for things like intimate searches. So when young people, I've been present for a young person that was, being stripped naked. And they can, I let them choose, like, do you want me to be there? Do you want me to turn away? How do you want that to be? But you're present for these roles, these moments in custody that are really scary. And once they've built that trust for you, you see how reassuring it is for them to have someone there. Because actually, if I ask you to all bring to mind a child that you know between 10, our age of criminal responsibility, and 18, if you put your hand up once you've got a child in mind that you know, yeah. And then keep your hand up if you can think of someone that could show up for that person if they were arrested, and that would show up for that person if they were arrested. So actually what we know is that, it's a bit of a loosely made point, but most people do have someone that would show up for them. And if you think about being a child that doesn't have someone that would show up for you in that moment, it's really awful. And the case actually is as well for vulnerable adults, is they even left so have people to show up. So it's even it can be even more important to show up for them as well. And I guess that's me.